There was once, in western Iceland, an old farm down the bottom of a deep, deep valley. Now that farm farmed all the long mountain slope. And there was a shepherd's bovey, high up on the mountainside, on the side of the field. And the shepherd there lived in isolation. Now in those days, when Christianity was new and bright in Iceland, everyone went to the church right down the end of the valley upon Christmas night. Everyone except for the housemaid in the farm, whose job it was to prepare the feast for Christmas Day. Oh, and the shepherd in the bovey. Well, housemaids came and housemaids went, and none wanted to stay too long, for Christmas night is sacred. But one year, a woman, her face hooded, so that when people looked at her, they were sure she was beautiful, but none could quite remember what she looked like. Hild came by and said she was more than happy to prepare the feast upon Christmas night. And so it was, she became the housemaid, and a very good housemaid she was too. She prepared the most wonderful feast. But that day, when they sent off to the shepherd to give him his part, they found the shepherd in the far-off bovey was dead. And they wondered at it, because he had been a man of rude health. But there was nothing to do. There was no circumstances that made them think it might be murder. It wasn't until the next Christmas, when once again a shepherd died up there in the bovey on Christmas night, that folk started to wonder at it and what it might mean. And the farmer started to grow desperate. He couldn't leave the flocks even for a night unintended, for the wolves in those days prowled along the mountainside. So he advertised, and the advertisement went here, there and everywhere, coming at last to a young lad in a far-off valley who had broken his heart and felt, well, I have nothing more to live for. Why no? And such was the pay, he thought, would make the fortune of me. But he hadn't quite given up the desire for life. And as he went to take the job, he went to high Snæfell, the holy mountain, where in those days dwelt folk cunning in the old ways. And a woman turned to him and said, "That is the elven children. They can kill unseen. But how do I have power over elves? Do not sleep on Christmas night." And so it was. The shepherd was up in the bovey, keeping awake all night, while men went to church and Hild prepared the feast. Now it was late, and he was beginning to feel drowsy, when all of a sudden he heard something. Pat, 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 pat. The sound of footprints going over fresh snow. And he was very much awake, but he huddled into his cloak and looked like one who might be asleep as the door opened with a gentle jangle of keys. And Hild came in. And she came up to him, and she took from her girdle a set of reins and a bridle. And she put the bridle in his mouth and held it tight and led him, as if one in a trance, as if one asleep, out of the bovey. And as she did it, she said to him, "I'm so sorry." And 3 tears fell upon the snow. But when she was out of the hut, she climbed upon his back. And she rode him up into the sky. She rode him wild. A witch ride, north. North to the very end of Iceland, where there was the great cleft that men said on Christmas night was once again what it had always been before, the gate to the hidden kingdom. Well, Hild led him down to that cave, and he slumped as exhausted. She took the bridle off. And then she went to the back of the cave, and she didn't come back. And he waited for a bit, and then he looked, and he saw the little lantern she had carried had disappeared. But there was a light coming, as it were, from the floor. And he crept to the back of the cave. And right at the very back he saw a cleft that opened on Christmas night, and in it a spiral staircase that went down and down and down and down into the earth. And so he followed down the stairs, down beyond the lands of man, down beyond light, beyond life, beyond Christmas itself, beyond any hope he had ever had. And all the while, down below, he saw the blue light of Hild's light leading him on and on and on. Now how long this was, the lad never knew. But there was an end, at least. He saw at last a glowing that looked like some kind of jewelled daylight come in from the bottom. And he came down at last, and he looked out, and there was a great, great chasm. But it was beautiful beyond his belief, for the sun was a living diamond, beating in the sky, and the fields were gems, emerald, with poppy flowers made of ruby. And as he looked, he saw Hild was going, flying almost, across the fields, to a great castle built of black basalt on the other side of the cavern, 2 miles or more, across a golden bridge. Well, the lad followed her as best he could. But she was long gone when he came to the castle. And the great gates of the castle stood open. As he stepped inside, there was suddenly a loud huzzah! As of a hero returning home. And he followed the sound. And he went through the long elven halls until he came right to the centre of the castle, where there was a great hall. And in that hall there was a banquet like he had never, ever seen. There were the fair folk arrayed in all their beauty and all their splendour. There were foods and viands and sweets. There were crackers. There were fireworks. There were such toys he could never dream of. And there was elven cheer on Yuletide. And as he looked, Hild was climbing the dais, and the elven king had a crown, and he put it on her head. And then 3 beautiful children came, and she hugged them with all her might and all her main, and all around all the elves laughed, and the cheer rippled through the hall, except on the left-hand side of the king, where there was an old crone who sat, gnarled and angry, as if one furious beyond redemption. And Hild greeted her, and she just snarled in reply. Now how long the feast went on, again the lad did not know. It seemed to go on and on and on. But in the end Hild stood up and said, "It's time I must return to the world of men. And who knows whether I will come back, for 2 deaths might have been accident, but 3. And the king turned to the woman on his left-hand side and said, "Mother, will you not let Hild now stay?" The old crone replied, "No, she knows the sole condition, the only condition that I set, by which I would allow a mortal woman to marry an elven king, to bear his children. She must go back to her own world until that condition is met." And Hild started to return to the hall. Well, the lad suddenly realised his peril. He ran out of the gates, across the fields and into the cave, and he went up the stairs, climbing now hard the steep stairs, without the light behind, without the light ahead, but the light behind, coming at long last, and only just, to the great cave where he'd started. And Hild came up, and she took the bridle down, And this time 3 tears she shed on his cheeks as she put the bridle on and said, "I'm so sorry." And then she mounted his back, and they rode their witch ride over glacier, through mountain fields, across the ice, south to the little bovey where he begun. And when he arrived, the lad was tireder than tired, and it felt to him like pressing nightmares were everywhere. But he stayed awake, and the power had no power to bite. And she left him slumped by the fire and was gone. Well, the next day, Hild was sad-eyed and avoided anybody's stares as all the men came in and the great feast was laid out and people started to cheer and celebrate. And then the farmer said, "Let's send for the young man, see if he's still alive, shall we?" And there was a ripple of joy when the word came down. The young man was alive and tireder than tired. And they led him in. Everyone cheered, save Hild, who looked suddenly scared. And the farmer had the young lad called up and said, "What happened?" And the man told the story. He told the story of Hild coming with the bride, of the witch ride, of the kingdom of the elves and the journey back, of the advice he'd been given by the old woman in Snedefell, and of the old woman below. And when the farmer heard that, he grew furious. His eyes grew black. "Shame on you, Hild! How dare you kill my men? Why should I not take cold iron and have you killed here and now?" And he drew a sword. But just then the farmer the young lad stood between the farmer and Hild and said, "No! Did you not hear the story? Hild is innocent. She longs for only to return to her world. She is cursed in ours. Let her live." And then there was suddenly a sound that none of them were expecting. A wild sound like summer sigh. A wild sound like the beautiful note of the beginning of life. It was Hild laughing, a sound they had never heard before. And she shouted, she cried, "The conditions are met! For my mother-in-law said I must ever be here amongst the world of men where I was born, unless, save on Yule night, when a man must die that I would ride. Save one who would live to tell my tale, and yet still plead my life. And now I am free, and now I can return." And all of a sudden, like warm light on a cold winter's day, she was gone. "But my blessing I give," she said, just as the last atmosphere of her presence was gone. "A blessing I give." And it was true. The young shepherd was said to be blessed. He married well and happily. He lived long, and his children were as beautiful as he was inside. And men say the blessing of Hild still lives in his family in Western Ireland.